Okay, so now I'm going to keep going through here and talk about what Audrey had to say. So, Audrey, like many of you, was bringing up this idea of an inclusive classroom and specifically how students with diverse learning needs and disabilities might be integrated into the classroom. Um, she really sets as a goal, like many of you, that she doesn't want to be so scared not to screw up that she would risk alienating a student even further. But she also recognizes that many teachers, and I think this is true of most education in the United States, including higher education, which is why it's so interesting that you guys go attend a school where aesthetic engagement is an important thing that you're valued on, and all these different kinds of things, social interaction, because I think that most of American education prioritizes math and verbal linguistic intelligences. So the more that you are able to really think about this as a goal for your own teaching, I think the better teacher you're going to be. Um, Getting back to the idea of educating yourself, Audrey says, I'm a firm believer that you have to know or at least have some correct information to teach to your student. What I think is interesting about this is that history is itself contested. The idea of truth is not entirely clear. There are multiple perspectives, and some people that I'll talk about later were, I think Holly maybe was talking about how important it is, and that she agreed with Maxim, that helping children develop that sense of balancing multiple perspectives is particularly critical. Audrey reinforced that it's important to show sensitivity when it comes to culture and ethnicity, that you need to have to straddle the line and create meaningful learning experiences and also have them be relevant and factual. In fact, you might talk about just balancing different perspectives on it. So I think why the author found the teacher's rain dance inappropriate was because it wasn't based on any factual findings. If she had done research and found something on rain dances, like the other teacher who found the talking stick and could discuss it in a more factual manner, it wouldn't have been deemed as such. I don't think the book is saying the teacher is in the wrong because she did have good intentions. I think what the text is trying to do is make you think more about the activities you're presenting to your students. I like the way that both Lindsay and Audrey are presenting perspectives and, in fact, sort of articulating their response in relationship to each other as well as the text. This is a really nice model of professional discourse and how you can even have disagreements with each other and negotiate those in professional and respectful ways. I think just my own opinion is that teaching sometimes has way too much a culture of nicey nice where it's like, oh, your point of view is great, my point of view is great, everybody is great. When it really is, how do we as professionals talk about legitimate disagreements? So, well done, guys. Jessica then followed, and she said that her goal, that she is in part because of her own love of reading, is through reading stories, Miss Gilland also has the opportunity to integrate language arts with her social studies lesson. Her students compare characters across the books and describe the problems each book and character went through. In doing so, the children learn the similarities and differences in each culture. And then she expanded upon that to talk about music, food, and art to create a lasting understanding of culture for students. Um, like many folks, Jessica connected it to this chapter to ED 116, and talking about the goals that multicultural teaching aims for, such goals as recognizing and respecting the culture of others, promoting social change to create a more equal and accepting society for all cultures, and that sharing those goals with those students is particularly important. And lastly, she said, I agree with Audrey. Do teachers not teach multiculturalism because they are afraid? I think that's one of the things that ED 116 wants to engage you with. It's one of the things that I want to engage you with in this class as well, is just, what's your own stuff, and how does that stuff get in the way of being able to teach in a clear and validating and manner that celebrates all cultures. Then we have Megan, who was talking about the social action approach. She said, the most interesting thing about these approaches is that it's not that hard to achieve the social action approach, and that teachers just need to use culturally responsive teaching. It's the teacher's job to meet the needs of every student and knowing their cultural background regardless of what kind of cultural difference. That doesn't just mean an ethnic group. It can mean religion, peer group, or family characteristics. I would add to that students' experiences in urban or rural settings, as well as socioeconomic differences among students. Later we'll hear about Holly when she moved from one school district to another and how that was a culturally dissonant perspective for her. So I don't want you to necessarily feel like, okay, well, I have all Caucasian students, so there isn't some cultural diversity here. There might be some really significant markers of difference among those students that you would need to know about to be a good teacher of them. So then Jenny talked about how to set up a democratic learning community, and that she believes it's important to set up an environment like this. The children need to feel respected and need to respect others. The 7 guiding principles were very useful to me. Setting up a class where students have a lot of social interaction time is very important to me. I think that children learn best by other students and being able to talk about what they know. That peer learning, particularly critical, I think is done differently if you have very young students than if you have older students. But and I would remind you that Yardsticks is a wonderful resource to think about how you structure peer learning and cooperative group kind of stuff at different ages. But I think that's a nice thing to think about. Oops, I skipped too much here. So here's Holly. So she was talking about that transformative approach really stuck out to her, that this approach enables students to view concepts and issues from multiple points of view. So not only are children learning about different cultures, but they're also hearing the point of view from some of the people in these cultures. And I think this will help students to become more interested, understand differences through another person, and also relate to them in that particular culture, or even understand their culture better. She said, it made me think about my own experiences in schooling and how I started off at MPS and then moved in 6th grade to Sussex. I wasn't mentally prepared for this, but most of all, I wasn't culturally prepared for this. I came from a completely different environment than Sussex, and out there multiculturalism is almost non-existent. So even moving from a situation where Holly was used to having a lot of different kinds of kids in her classroom to a situation where there wasn't, made her differences feel more acute. She says, I had a different characteristic than the people I encountered there, which were all negative. I felt that if the school had had a certain multicultural agenda, my experience would have been more enjoyable. Lastly, she says, summarizes some of the things that other people have brought up by saying, how can someone teach something if they have never been around it or a part of it, or just don't know anyone outside their own culture? This raises important questions and could even be considered when the goals are finally created for this type of education. Nobody walks around trying to offend people, but it still does happen. That's why having an open mind is important when becoming a teacher for this particular reason, and also because even as a teacher, you will learn right along with your students. Nicely stated. Laura then talks about that kind of tourist approach, i.e. the contribution and accomplishment of Dr. Martin Luther King and African American history and culture only in the month of February and on his birthday, and the significance of the Battle of Puebla on the 5th of May. That this is oftentimes implemented with good intentions, however, it does very little to broaden children's understanding and appreciation of people and their cultures. Then Laura reinforces Audrey's observation that having students sign a social contract is a great idea, one which I will definitely incorporate into my classroom. This method helps students be responsible for their own behaviors, as well as provide them with a sense of accomplishment and self-esteem when they abide by it. Then we had Maria, who was talking about these other approaches: contribution, additive, transformative, and social action. Like I said before, Maria observed that these approaches remind me a lot of Alverno's abilities, as I recalled reading about students using skills such as problem-solving, decision-making, and effective citizenship within the examples. I feel like every school should be like Alverno. Woohoo! Go Alverno Inferno! Maria said, this week's reading also discusses the fact that educators should foster the development of self-acceptance, but discourage ethnocentrism. She connects it to ED 116, as many others of you did. Maria says, I agree with Lindsay and Evelise when they say that the author of the text has a great way of explaining things in ways that are easy for me to understand and actually enjoy reading a textbook for a change. I also really enjoy the example lessons this text provides. Not only have I already taught similar lessons to these examples, which makes me feel great, but I can build onto those lessons with some of these examples and make them even better. Like I think I described to you guys, I actually involved last spring's cohort of ED 352 in selecting this book. I think that's a model that you can think about using with your own kids, saying, what do you think? Let's evaluate this text together and think about, would this be a good text for us to study this thing, or would this be a good text? Teachers sometimes do play a role, not necessarily in wide-scale textbook adoption, that's usually made at either the school level or the district level, but I think that you can involve kids in a critical analysis of the different texts that they might use to learn about a particular topic. Let me see how long this has gone.